Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 3:06 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, we explore the big legal immigration debate. Nobody thinks we should have illegals in the country, but just how many legal immigrants should be coming in every year? And does it affect Americans in a bad way? We'll discuss all of it coming up with Batya Ungar Sargon at 3:30. She's an opinion editor at NewsWeek. And then Neil Patel, co-founder and publisher of the Daily Caller News Foundation. He'll join us at 5:30 on the same topic, kind of a wide array of opinions on this subject today. And then at 4:30 today, we'll be joined by David Asher from the Hudson Institute. He's a former State Department COVID investigator, and get his reaction to new revelations this week about just how badly the deep state tried to prevent you from finding out about that lab leak in Wuhan. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Well, as we end the final full calendar year of Joe Biden's terrible presidency, there's a lot of stuff happening. One of them is we're just basically taking a look back at the way we were treated during his presidency and how things have gone. Additionally, truth is spilling out now that the political consequences of sharing it have been diminished drastically. The election's over, so there are elements of the left that feel like they can finally cop to some of it and their role in the destruction of this country, because now voters won't have a say for a while. And I'll get to the latest version of that today in just a moment. But first, that look back in history. You remember the number of times that we were told that the economy is in fantastic shape under Joe Biden? Remember all of those times where the American news media just regurgitated what you knew to be a lie based on your own experience, your own finances, your own bank account, your own grocery shopping experience? But here's what the press, which fewer and fewer people actually watch, was telling you.
Economics. Polls consistently show that a majority of the American people disapprove of the president's handling of the economy.
Eviction filing rates are soaring, 50% higher than they were before the pandemic.
Over half of Americans earning a six-figure salary report that they're actually living paycheck to paycheck.
Tens and tens of millions of people are struggling to put food on the table.
The number of homeless people on the streets and in shelters across the U.S. increased significantly this year.
Now, by the way, these clips I'm sharing with you, some of them do reflect well on the news outlets that are covering all of this, because some of them are covering, that's CBS at the end, covering some of this accurately. But you can thank Tom Elliott for putting all of this together over at Grabien. He shared this some time ago. But again, it involves members of the media claiming outright the economy is doing great. How come people don't know it?
Trying to rev up his economic vision for America, but a lot of people aren't buying it because they can't literally buy anything.
I'm so sick of how expensive everything fucking is.
Well, let's dump that, please, Dave. All right, so you get all these clips of the media saying, yeah, everything is great. And then Americans are saying, no, it's not. No, it's not, which is, of course, what led to, in no small part, to Donald Trump's reelection as president of the United States. And thank goodness. And now today, yet another piece of news on this front, a piece of bad news on this front, the revelation that under Joe Biden, homelessness has now soared to the highest level ever recorded in the United States of America. New York Times today, homelessness soared to the highest level on record this year, driven by forces that included a surge in migrants seeking asylum, a national housing crisis, and the end of pandemic-era measures to protect the needy, the federal government reported on Friday. The number of people experiencing homelessness topped 770,000 people. That's just the ones the government has recorded. An increase of more than 18% over last year. And it's the largest annual increase since the count began in 2007. Nearly every category of unhoused people grew. That's New York Times for homelessness. With the rise especially steep among children and people and families. The report released by the Department of Housing and Urban Development showed that homelessness had risen by a third in the past 2 years after years of only modest fluctuations. Well, the last 2 years, that's right in the heat of the Biden administration is what they're saying. The agency, they say, blamed factors such as, quote, our worsening national affordable housing crisis, end quote, inflation, and the end of certain aid programs from the pandemic. There you go. But federal officials on a call with reporters placed special emphasis on the rise in asylum-seeking migrants who overwhelmed the shelter systems where much of the increase occurred. You got that? So in their official records, in the paper that they shared, the report that they released, they don't emphasize migrants, asylum-seeking migrants. Let me put this differently. Foreign nationals who the Biden administration has imported into our country, trafficked into our country. On the call with reporters, the federal officials were more candid. They said, it's all of these foreign nationals that we've allowed into this country that are causing this. That's what they told journalists. So the New York Times has now publishing this. Again, weeks after the election is already concluded. They say the government does not track the migration status of the homeless, so it's hard to precisely disentangle the twin crises of domestic poverty and foreigners fleeing troubled lands. Distinct challenges with different solutions. It is possible that much or even most of the rise came from the increase in foreign asylum seekers that started in 2022, but has begun to abate since the homeless count occurred at the start of this year. Still, the record numbers are likely to widen the growing partisan divide over domestic homelessness. Democrats often blame soaring housing costs, flagging governmental rent subsidies, and extremes in economic inequality, and they tend to support an expanded safety net. Many Republicans blame liberal permissiveness and want to require unhoused people, homeless people, to seek aid for mental illness or substance abuse as a condition for receiving aid. President-elect Trump has called for clearing cities of encampments and placing unhoused people into camps, they say. They say there's one bright spot here. Veterans are the lone group among the homeless who have declined in homelessness over the course of the last year. That continues a long-term trend that is at odds with the rancor of the broader homelessness debate. The number of homeless veterans fell by about 8% last year and is down more than half since 2009. So, while I'm glad to see that trend is headed in the right direction, I'm horrified to see that homelessness is at a record. And the reason for that, they really don't make any bones about it, is illegal foreign nationals, who the Biden administration rolled out the red carpet for, and in fact trafficked many in to the United States. Now, if you go back in time, and not long in time, to the ways that the New York Times in particular was covering this, about the impact that illegals have on the economy and housing specifically, they poo-pooed the idea that illegals had any role in this. In fact, if you go to October 11th, this is before the election, October 11th, the New York Times runs a piece with the following headline: Trump blames immigrant surge for housing crisis. Most economists disagree. That's the same New York Times that today is telling you that the, quote, immigrant surge is causing the housing crisis, that homelessness has skyrocketed during all of this. Former President Donald J. Trump and his running mate, Senator JD Vance, regularly blame America's housing affordability crisis on a recent surge in immigration. They point to their plans for mass deportations of undocumented workers as a part of the solution. But most economists do not believe that immigrants have been a major driver of the recent run-up in housing prices. Rents and home costs started to surge in 2020 and 2021 before the flow of newcomers began to pick up in 2022 and 2023. Well, so there's a lot of, this is multivariate, true, but there's some other elements that you could look at here. What was happening in 2020 and 2021? Well, the government was printing untold sums of money and driving up an inflation crisis in the United States, decreasing the value of every dollar that you have in your bank account and skyrocketing the cost of everything to include homes. That's true. So that definitely was happening. That abuse happened in a big way after Joe Biden got into office, especially because they passed an unnecessary bill that infused trillions of new dollars into the economy that made all of us poorer. Bad. And simultaneously, the second he arrives in office, he welcomes millions of foreign nationals illegally into the United States of America. And that leaves us where we are today, with all of these problems that President Trump has to pick up the pieces from. Now, you heard the New York Times, they referenced not just President Trump, but JD Vance, and infamously, Senator Vance Now, Vice President-elect JD Vance, he brought this up during the vice presidential debate with goofy Tim Walz. Here's how that went.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now,
so there's JD Vance. He's saying this before the election. The media are treating him as if he's a kook. The New York Times runs a story saying economists disagree that all of these illegal aliens are having an impact whatsoever on housing. And now today, the New York Times is straight up admitting that the Department of Housing and Urban Development under Joe Biden says, yeah, all these foreigners that we've imported into the country, it turns out there are costs to that. There are costs to that we didn't have the capacity to meet the housing needs. And now homelessness is at a record level. Now, when homelessness goes up to record levels, you would imagine all of the associated other data points with homelessness would also go up, and of course they are. You know that food bank usage is at records right now? Food bank usage, people requiring food assistance because they can't afford it on their own. Food bank usage is at record levels, and additionally, in terms of the number of people being served, and also in terms of the number of people who are requesting assistance. So the people whose needs can't always be met. In fact, if you go back during the election, there was a piece in NBC News. They did cover this, but they cover it as related specifically to swing states. I don't remember them obsessing over this on MSNBC, but on their website, NBC News, they wrote this headline. In key swing states, the lines at food banks are growing longer, they wrote. They emphasized that across rural communities and industrial towns of western Michigan, semi-trucks hauling thousands of pounds of food are pulling up to church parking lots and community centers where growing lines of people are waiting for a few boxes of free groceries. One truck can carry enough food for up to 600 households, but some days, even that isn't enough. 600 households. Even that isn't enough to meet the demand, which has gone up 18% over just the past 12 months. According to Feeding America West Michigan, a nearly 20% rise in demand for food from food banks over the course of just the last year in Michigan. And that trend repeats itself all over the place, all across our country. And the Biden administration made this decision knowingly. They knew what they were doing. When they kicked open the border, it wasn't a mistake. This whole idea that they would refer to this as a challenge, or, you know, that was their euphemistic way of not calling it a crisis in the early days. The reality that you and I both know is they made this happen. They wanted this to happen. Biden campaigned on this happening. He said outright that he wanted illegals to, quote, surge the border. Remember that phrase? Surge the border. And surge they did. Surge they did. People arriving those first days of the Biden administration explicitly thanking Joe Biden. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe. And now what are they up to? Well, if they're not occupying homes in the United States, they're among the homeless that are now being served at record levels in the United States of America. Again, things your government only tells you when the political consequences are behind them. Let's go to the phones. I've got Tom calling in from Woodbridge, line 1. Hello, Tom. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hey, Tom. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hey, okay. You're on the air, sir. Hello.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I had called. You had mentioned earlier, then you get on the homeless discussion here, but I wanted to call. This has to do with the Wuhan. Did you get brought up this thing? Okay. it's been very frustrating to me because I've known since the very beginning that what was going on. We should have. My wife is Italian. I was stationed as a naval officer in Italy, learned to speak. We have Italian television. And in early January, it was all over the Italian news. Italian journalists were saying their sources were suggesting that this stuff had been leaked out of a lab in Wuhan.
Mm-hmm.
This came at least 6 weeks before the discussion ever occurred in the United States. It's like we were oblivious to it. But it was all over the news.
Yeah.
This was open news. The moment a couple Republican congressmen started speaking about it, I think it was a senator started speaking about it, right away our left-wing media and the Democrats kicked in and say, oh, it's a right-wing talking points. And this has never been countered. It's never been effectively countered. The point is, it was not made up. We were here, like I said, it was frustrating. My wife and I are listening to this 6 weeks beforehand. And this came straight out of the Italians who were suffering. Yes. My family was right in ground zero in Lombardia, Milan, where this was hit.
You know, Tom, if you remember that time frame, there was something else going on January of 2020 that the media wanted everybody to focus on. And they didn't want to talk about anything else. There were no other villains in the world except for Donald Trump because they were impeaching him in January of 2020. In February of 2020, the Senate trial goes on. That's where Trump is acquitted in that ridiculous, that was the Ukraine-Biden impeachment saga. And the focus fire was Trump. Anything else was considered a conspiracy theory. Nonsense. Don't try and distract us. We have to take down Trump. And so the media abandoned everyone in their time of need for a fake impeachment hoax. And then, of course, didn't want to at all offer any credence to the theory that people like Tom Cotton was sharing or that President Trump was sharing, that China had way more to do with this than anybody had realized at the time. They said, don't dignify that. The second our enemy says it, it can't be true. And that's how they ended up with the lowest trust they've ever had. Deservedly so. Batya Ungar Sargon will join us in just a moment. We're going to talk about a big legal immigration debate breaking out on the right. I think it's very healthy. Can't wait to talk about it with her. All right. Good afternoon to you. 3:36 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, David Asher will join us from the Hudson Institute. He's a former State Department COVID investigator. He'll react to the big Wall Street Journal report this week on how the Biden administration, the deep state, has been doing its best to cover up all the details about the lab leak in Wuhan all these years later. And Neil Patel, co-founder and publisher of the Daily Caller News Foundation, jumps in to that H-1B visa debate that the right is having right now, debating legal immigration in the United States. We'll talk to Neil at 5:30. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Yeah, headlines galore today saying that the right is in an all-out civil war over immigration. But to me, it feels like a pretty healthy policy debate, actually. One I'd much rather be having than the one that involves Kamala Harris becoming president of the United States and us discussing just how many millions of people should have amnesty. I prefer what do we do about our legal immigration system debate? And for more on that, I want to bring in our next guest, the always lovely Batya Ungar Sargon, the opinion editor over at NewsWeek and the author of Bad News, How Woke Media is Undermining Democracy. Batya, good to have you back.
So much for having me, Vince. Happy holidays. It's so great to be here with you.
Likewise. It's always so nice to have you. There's a lot of this debate to the extent that it exists. It got kicked off this week because of two people in particular, the heads of the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. And Vivek's post on X in particular really lit the fireworks on the subject. He was saying that the reason, I'm going to read some of his post. The reason top tech companies often hire foreign-born and first-generation engineers over, quote, Native Americans isn't because of an innate American IQ deficit, which is a lazy and wrong explanation. A key part of it comes down to the C word, culture. Tough questions demand tough answers, and if we're really serious about fixing the problem, we have to confront the truth. Our American culture has venerated mediocrity over excellence for way too long, at least since the 90s and likely longer. That doesn't start in college. It starts young. He goes on to say that the culture that celebrates the prom queen over the math Olympiad champ or the jock over the valedictorian will not produce the best engineers. So Vivek approaches this from the perspective of we need foreign labor in the United States because American culture rewards mediocrity, and unfortunately, that's a big problem that we need to confront. What do you make of all this?
Oh boy, Vince, I cannot remember the last time I was this angry at a news cycle on Twitter. I'm so angry.
Yeah.
I find this whole train of thought that Vivek and Elon Musk have been engaging in over Christmas to be utterly appalling, worthy of the worst tendencies on the far left. And it's so shocking to see this coming from people who consider themselves on the right. I agree with you. I don't think this is a debate. I think that it is these two guys who have an enormous platform, obviously. I haven't really seen anybody in the MAGA movement defending them. And it's utterly appalling. I mean, the idea that the reason that America's working class is struggling is because they are culturally, lazy, stupid, lack talent, lack fortitude, lack commitment to their families. It's disgusting. It's totally disgusting. And if you go through Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy's tweets, that's effectively what they've been saying is we need more H-1B visas because immigrants are better workers. And of course, the answer to that is, well, yeah, they're better workers for cheap. They're better workers at terrible, terrible conditions. These H-1B visas are effectively indentured servants because they're here at the sufferance of whatever company has brought them in. They cannot make any complaints about the workplace. If they do that, they get shipped back immediately.
Right.
They work for half of what Americans do. And, it just puts the lie to the idea that there aren't jobs. There are jobs. It's just that the heads of big corporations like Elon Musk would much rather import cheaper foreign labor. That's what it comes down to. The distinction between legal and illegal immigration is utterly meaningless here. The question is whether you would rather bring in somebody willing to work for cheaper as a landscaper and as a janitor or as a coder. Why are we not making these great jobs for American workers? And the thing that really rankles is that Vivek saying that the working class is not doing these jobs because they're lazy, because there's some sort of cultural deficit. It's totally backwards. What we've actually done is create an economy that is an upward transfer of wealth to the sort of knowledge industry, which is, yes, filled with mediocrities who have credentials from fancy universities and make a ton of money at the expense of working class people who are working so much harder than them, unbelievably hard, 2-3 jobs and struggling to feed their families. And to have these people, Elon Musk himself is an immigrant, come here and sneer at American workers, at the American working class. However angry you are, we're not angry enough about this. And I really hope that Donald Trump realizes what this is. And I'll just say one more thing, Vince, and then I'll let you get a word in edgewise, which is, I've had this feeling from the start that Doge was going to be effectively a cover for the interests of the Chinese Communist Party because, of course, Elon Musk's entire supply chain is in China. He has never said a bad word about the CCP. He's utterly obeisant to them and their interests. And if you look at what happened, yes, there was this huge bill, 1,500 pages, blah, blah, blah. One of the top things that Elon Musk, by intervening, got removed from this bill was a ban on investments in China. He's doing the bidding of the CCP, and it's all, he likes to masquerade as some sort of maverick free speech person over here. But look what he's doing right now. He's been demonetizing accounts on X that criticize his position on H-1B visas. So I just feel like this is not MAGA. I really hope, and I believe actually Donald Trump will see through this. I really think that these people have, written their exit ticket, and they really should have. If you come in here and you call American workers lazy or stupid, that should be an immediate dismissal.
All right, so there's a lot to unpack there, and thank you for laying it all out. So I want to go piece by piece because I happen to think that it has enough complexity that the nuance matters with this debate. And the reason I say that is because, you just talked about the goals of the Chinese Communist Party. we know that especially through vehicles like TikTok, one of the things that they like to achieve is actually the spread of mediocrity as an ideal in the United States of America, right? This is why when you compare TikTok to the Chinese counterpart, the one that the Chinese actually operate, they build a system that teaches people to advance in terms of their excellence. Meanwhile, the U.S. version is one that tries to hold up mediocrity as some sort of goal. And to your point, which I think is very well said, the U.S., there's been a system that sort of rewarded mediocrity of these sort of the children of orthodontists who go on to like some fancy school that only they can afford and then get great high-paying jobs with no discernible life skills whatsoever, leaving everybody else going, what the hell is this system? I think you're totally right to indict that system. But on the other hand, I'm not ready to throw Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy out with the bathwater. I think that they've done remarkably important things for the country, especially as it relates to working to get Donald Trump reelected against the very establishment that you and I both loathe. And when it comes to our immigration debate, I think it's foolish for anybody to discount. I mean, this is not directed at you. This is directed more at Elon and Vivek to the extent that their arguments can be boiled down. It's foolish to not take very seriously how our system works to the benefit of Americans, because that does seem to me to be the number one thing that we should think about. How does this work for Americans? We're the United States of America. How does this work great for us? And if that includes bringing in super talented labor to occasionally help when we can't find it anywhere else in the country, great, do that. That's wonderful. They say you're taking the cream from around the planet. That's good. But that's not what our H-1B system is. You talked about H-1B visas. H-1B right now, as it exists, is not a merit-based system, but instead it's a lottery, and it shouldn't be. Additionally, employers have to sponsor H-1B visa recipients into the country. So again, as you said, Batya, it's a form of indentured servitude. They don't have anywhere to go. They have no portability whatsoever. They can't just like drop that job and go somewhere else easily. That doesn't happen like that. And so, in fact, the company has all of the leverage over them. And meanwhile, American workers are not getting hired at all, and that's the problem with H-1B. And finally, I'll say this, and this is a weird conversation between you and me because it involves both of us talking at length. But there's another category of visa called O1. There's an O1 visa, which is supposedly for a very narrow set of extraordinary talent. Why isn't the conversation more about, okay, how can we better utilize that, and then how can we get rid of all of this H-1B visa abuse?
I was just going to say that. I think you're totally right. We already have a visa for attracting people who are uniquely talented in whatever industry they're in. And it's not the H-1Bs, right? And for Elon Musk to then go out and say, I'm talking about the 0.01%, he's not actually talking about that. So I think there is a little bit of, double dealing going on here. I agree with you. What Elon Musk did to get Donald Trump elected, I'm very grateful to him for that. I am unbelievably grateful for how pro-Israel he has been in the wake of October 7th, when there was enormous pressure on the far right, where he, the fringes I'm talking about, but a vocal minority on the fringes, to sort of, kick Israel to the curb and say America first doesn't include Israel. And I think that I have a lot of gratitude for him. At the same time, I think there is a very material reality that we're dealing with here that cannot be discounted. And it's very obvious to us, I think, when you look at a company like Apple. I mean, is Apple even an American company anymore? The way that it's playing ball with the CCP,
right.
The way that it is so evenly distributed in terms of, the talent pool, the workforce, where it is. It's a multinational conglomerate. It's not even really an American company anymore. It's very hard to say that it operates in the interest of, the United States. I think Elon Musk loves America, but at the same time, I think that his economic reality is very much attuned to the CCP. And for a long time, when he was sort of jumping up and down on stage with Donald Trump, I was sitting there asking myself, Vince, why is China allowing this? Obviously, they would rather Kamala Harris win, right? I mean, the Democrats are so much softer on China than Donald Trump. But you look at what they've already gotten out of this relationship between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, and it's a lot. And he's not even president yet. I'm just saying, let's just be aware. I think Elon Musk is a sort of polarized figure. He's polarizing, but he's also polarized. There's a part of him that loves this country and loves free speech. And then there's a part of him that is willing to demonetize people who criticize him on Twitter and is very, very close with China. And I just would want people to keep that in mind when we look at moments like this, you know, like that there is a reality here. And I'm glad to see the MAGA movement pushing back on this H-1B visa thing, because I think it's incredibly important. This is not just a like interstitial debate. This is not just a culture war. You know, this is not about Indians. It's about American workers, which is what the MAGA movement is all about, the dignity of the American worker.
Yeah. Well, amen. And I've been saying for a long time, I love so much about Elon, but I was always in the back of my head concerned about the China stuff, and not just in the back of my head, out of the front of my head too. I've been talking about it on the air, but it does matter to me, and holding the powerful accountable is always a useful exercise, because in the end, you either figure out why you don't want them on your side, or it actually makes them better, and either outcome is good in my view. Hey, Batya Ungar Sargon, thank you very much. Always appreciate your energy and your time. So nice to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Vince. Happy New Year, happy holidays, and we'll talk in the new year, I'm sure. Thank you so much.
Same to you. There she is. Yeah, my thanks again to the always energetic Batya Ungar Sargon for joining us. She's mad at Elon today, and Vivek. Yeah, and Vivek, yeah, he said American culture has venerated mediocrity over excellence for too long, and it's had damaging impacts on the United States. Is that justification for hiring untold sums of foreign workers as Americans look for these jobs? Your call's coming in on the subject. Let's see. Danny's calling in from Virginia on line 3. Hello, Danny. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. I love your program. Well, I listen to it as often as I can, especially when I'm in Northern Virginia and in Maryland. So but I get you on the app down in Southern Virginia where I live.
Thank you for doing that. I appreciate you listening.
Yeah, I agree with everything Vivek said. The essence of what he said, it wasn't confusing to me. From a standpoint, if you own a business and you contract labor, you see a difference in the American worker and the worker who comes here with, I would say the difference with the essence of the difference would be effort versus expectation. The foreign worker and a foreign individual here looking for work has a lot of effort, and the American person that you hire typically have a lot of expectation.
Yeah,
I would say that's the difference between the two.
I see. This is one of those things I look at. I always think these things are more complex than perhaps our media cycles give them credit for. But if you're asking, are there problems in American culture right now? Well, yeah. Turn on your television. Have you seen what's going on out there? Also, like the sort of like everybody gets a trophy culture. They don't keep score for little kids' games and all of this. It does inculcate this idea that in the end, everybody has to win and that merit itself is irrelevant. Correct. So are there cultural things that need to be addressed? Absolutely. But at the same time, it's okay to admit that we have an immigration system that's outright rigged, in some cases against American workers. If you're bringing in tons of foreign work and paying them half the salary, and they can't escape that arrangement, and Americans are left out in the process, that's a problem. And our immigration system should be built around prioritizing Americans and what's good for our country.
But, Vince, if we compete, we win.
Yeah. Well, that's the key.
If we compete, we win. They don't want. A lot of times, they don't want to compete. It's called expectation.
Yeah. Well, that's right. We have to.
I see it in the contracting of labor.
Yeah.
For some of the properties we have, I see it in the essence in the office, the effort, and I just see it.
Right.
I just call it the way it is.
Yeah. Well, you're using your real life experience to form your opinions, which is, I think, the best way to do it. Hey, Danny, thank you for that call and for listening in. Always appreciate that. That's Danny in Virginia, sometimes Southern Virginia, sometimes Northern Virginia. Always available to listen to us, though. He uses the app on the WMAL app. You can do that, too. Coming up, more of your calls on this subject. Want to get your response to this big debate. Is there a problem with American culture? Vivek says there is. Should we be bringing as many foreign workers as possible into the United States? That debate raging now on the right. It's a good one, I think. Stay with us. Coming up, also, David Asher, former COVID investigator in the Trump administration. We'll get his reaction to the Biden administration covering up that lab leak in Wuhan, refusing even to tell Joe. They were worried he might tell somebody else.